Hey everybody, what's going on? It is James here with Crypto Common Sense, aka 3Peaks Trading. And in this video, I want to talk about the Bitcoin market cycle, and I want to talk about where I expect Bitcoin to top at. Before I jump into the content for the video, please stop now, give the video a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more frequent updates. So what you see on the chart first is a time-based market cycle. But before I talk about that, I want to pull up a different chart and we'll look at this relative strength chart that I've now been using for, over 3 years. One thing you need to understand is right now, Bitcoin on its relative strength chart is just now retesting the all-time highs from 2021. We've been consolidating at that level now for about 3 months or so. So that's not unusual. We've come up to a level that some people are probably taking profits at, and you have people buying Bitcoin, you have other people taking profits on Bitcoin and moving into other assets. And that creates an equilibrium, which is what creates a range like this. Now, typically speaking, when you see a range at an area of resistance or support, it is actually a sign that the momentum or the trend is going to continue, because what's happening here is we have bears pushing down, okay? They're selling Bitcoin. We have bulls who are accumulating Bitcoin, and the bears are unable to push this off this line. And so I always use, an analogy with American football, which ironically, I don't watch American football. I haven't in 20 years, but in American football, you have the end zone and you have the 100-yard field. One team, tries to get into the other team's end zone. And I always look at these areas like this is the end zone and this is our defense up here. This is our offense trying to cross that line and score a touchdown. If the defense cannot push the offense, in other words, if the Bears can't push the Bulls off that line, eventually they're going to score, because eventually the supply up here is likely to be exhausted. Demand will take over and it will break through. Now, sometimes what happens is demand actually gets exhausted and the bears do win. There's too much supply and it gets pushed back down. But typically that happens during phases of distribution, which is the end of a bull cycle. When you've just had a move up and you're consolidating at an area of resistance, more often than not, supply will be exhausted and demand will win out and the bulls will actually push higher. So that's what I think is happening right here on this relative strength chart. I think that Bitcoin is still poised to gain ground versus the QQQ. There's always that weird scenario where, let's say, the stock market crashes. There's a weird scenario where the stock market could actually crash and Bitcoin could crash with it, losing value versus the US dollar while still gaining value versus the QQQ. That is a possibility. So just because this chart looks bullish does not guarantee in any way that Bitcoin will gain ground versus the US dollar. All right, it's very important to understand that. So let's go back over to this chart. This chart here is actually a US dollar chart. What's interesting about Bitcoin is how cyclical it actually is. We talk about markets, how, past performance doesn't guarantee future performance. We talk about how, markets don't repeat, but they might rhyme. But with Bitcoin, over its history, it has actually been this weirdly repeating asset. And it's a shame, that we don't have hindsight ahead of time, because I didn't believe in these 4-year cycles in 2018. I didn't believe in them in 2021, really. And it's only now in hindsight that I'm saying, there's a lot of evidence stacking up that says these cycles really are based and kind of anchored in these halving events where Bitcoin undergoes its halvings every 4 years. So if we look back, for example, at the bear market of 2017 that, went through 2018, so starting in really December of 2017 and then went through December of 2018, that bear market lasted about 52 weekly candlesticks, okay, which was roughly a year before it bottomed. If we look at the bear market, for example, from 2021, where it topped to the bottom in 2022, it lasted, are you ready for this? 54 candlesticks. So 52 back here, 54 over here. If we look at the high, so from the low of the bear market in 2018 to the high of the bull market in 2021, it was roughly 152 candlesticks. If we kind of, extract that and extrapolate on our chart today, if we had that same 152 week bull cycle, it's going to put the top somewhere around October of 2025, which would line up almost perfectly with the generic 4-year cycle that Bitcoin has typically followed, because our last high was in November of 2021, our last market cycle high. So that's kind of interesting. But the other thing that's interesting to me is, for example, from the all-time high in 2017 to the all-time high in 2021 versus US dollars, it was 204 bars. If we look at the same thing, our all-time high in 2021, and we measure up 204 bars, that is also pointing to a high in October of 2025. Now, the reason that makes sense to me is because it does follow the generic 4-year cycle, but also because of where we're at on that other chart that I just showed you, that market cycle chart, that relative strength chart versus the QQQ. Because on that QQQ chart, it looks like we've either, entered into optimism area up in this zone, or maybe even potentially, I think it's less likely, but potentially maybe this was actually disbelief, and this pump here and all this consolidation is actually hope through here, and we haven't even yet hit optimism. Somebody asked on Facebook, they're like, we've been in a bull market for quite a while. It seems, maybe unlikely that we would just now be at optimism or hope. But you have to remember that the way these cycles work is there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of chop, 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 chop. And then the last 6 to 12 months is where they go absolutely bananas, when there's no denying that it's a bull market. That's when the market becomes parabolic, when nobody can stand with a straight face and say, this is not a bull market. As long as Bitcoin is chopping around and stuff, that leaves doubt, that leaves naysayers. And so that market just builds and builds and builds momentum. But once it breaks out where nobody can argue, there's no longer a leg to stand on, it goes up typically very, very quickly. And then it usually ends in some type of blow off top type of fashion, and then goes down very, very quickly. And so, for example, if you look back at like 2017, you can see how it kind of chopped around, but then once it decided to go, it was game over. Like basically here in September of 2017, there was no more, messing around. From September to December, the market went absolutely nuts. In fact, even measured versus, the QQQ, from the low to the high over that period, it went up over 500% in just 3 months. All that time before that, look at this. The all-time high back here in 2013, it was not hit again until 2017. But then from that all-time high being hit until the end of the bull market was about 7 months. So think about that. It hit the all-time high, and then in 7 months, that's when all the gains happened. If you go back to May of 2017, that's when I bought my first Bitcoin. It's not when I first mined it. I mined it for the first time in 2014 and lost to freaking Bitcoin. I don't even know where it's at. But it was a tiny amount anyway, I'm sure. But I bought my first Bitcoin around $1,600 in May of 2017. And then it exploded to 20 grand by the end of that year, 7 months. So think about that. We're just now, remember, testing that all-time high. What happened last time? Well, from 2017's high, it got retested in 2021. January 2021, it finally retested that high on relative strength. And then from January all the way through March, just 2 months on this relative strength chart, Bitcoin went bonkers, right? It basically went straight up. It had the pullback here, and from January through February versus the QQQ, Bitcoin rocketed up over double. And then, of course, if we go back over and look at a US dollar chart during the same time, from January through March. So here was January, it was around 28,000. And by March, it was up, by April, it was up to $65,000. Exploded in US dollar value by over 125%. So when we look at bull cycles, that's typically how they work. That's how market cycles work. You hit that all-time high, and then everyone's on board. Oh my gosh, it's a bull market. and they go nuts. So if we're looking at this chart, and again, we've just now hit the all-time high from 2021, and we're saying that, this chart here kind of predicts like maybe October of 2025 is when the cycle is going to top. And we say, okay, well, here's this. What's, 6 or 7 months out from now? Well, it would be August, September area. So all of these things are pointing to a fourth quarter market cycle top. Okay. Now, again, that doesn't guarantee it happens because there's always those black swan events. There's always those anomalies that we can't foresee coming. And even if we didn't have anomalies, there's no guarantee that past performance predicts future performance. But we have to, as traders and as investors, we try to take all the evidence and we try to make an objective decision about what's most likely to happen. And again, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm in a very fortunate position now, more fortunate now than I was in the past. Even though I had some really good calls in the past, I also had some bad calls. I was emotionally attached to it all throughout that because I did have a considerable amount of cryptocurrency. For example, in 2017, I was holding 21 Bitcoin. That's a lot of cryptocurrency. And even in 2020, I had 6 figures worth of cryptocurrency. Even as a guy who was very skeptical, I was sitting on 6 figures worth of cryptocurrency. But this time around, I have very little cryptocurrency. Not nothing, more than probably the average person does, but nowhere near, what I used to have. And so I have less dollar value today than I've, had since 2017, actually. And percentage-wise, it's a very small percentage of my overall net worth, which means that I just don't have any emotional attachment. I would love to see Bitcoin go up. I think that would be exciting because, again, it would basically be free money, if you will, because all of the money I have in crypto at this point is all money that was profits to begin with. All of my original investments were cashed out long ago. So that'd be awesome. Free money is good, great. But if not, if it does crash and I somehow mistime the top and it dumps down to, 10 grand or 20 grand or 40 grand or whatever, cool. Maybe I'll even think about tiptoeing in now that we're getting more and more regulation around it. One of my big reasons that I didn't re-enter the market in a big way in 2022, which, and again, hindsight being hindsight, yeah, I bought a tiny little bit of Bitcoin in November 2022. I bought a little bit on Kraken and I bought a tiny little bit on Coinbase. So I did buy Bitcoin literally, I think it was the exact day that it bottomed, but it was a very small amount. And one of the reasons I didn't come in, swinging big and swinging for the fences is because I almost lost a fortune with FTX. Up to that point, Coinbase had been saying things that, made me believe that they were FDIC insured. Kraken had been saying things that made me believe they're FDIC insured. And so I had multiple 6 figures in liquid capital on those sites that I was using to trade with, that I was using to invest with, etc., on top of all the cryptocurrency I had. And so when the FTX thing happened, and I almost lost, considerable amount of money with that, fortunately I got it off in time, it made me realize how exposed I was. It made me realize how unsafe and unregulated crypto was, which I know in hindsight, people are like, well, you should have known that all along. I should have, but I didn't, right? I believed what the sites were saying. And once I realized like, hey, you came very close, you could have lost, hundreds of thousands of dollars through systemic risk, I wanted no part of it. And that's the reason I didn't get heavily involved at the bottom in 2022. I chose instead to move my full attention over to equities and options because over there I have, FDIC insurance on my uninvested cash on some sites. And I also have what's called SIPC insurance, which insures each account up to $500,000. And so that's the reason I didn't get involved. Not because I hate crypto or anything. I've learned a lot through crypto. Crypto changed my life. And so I personally think crypto is great. And I've always said, and it's ironic because even when I was a bear, people seem to forget that I was a bear in trading, but I was never a bear overall. Like I always said that I thought people should take their vice money and instead of buying alcohol, drugs, tobacco, etc., they should put it into Bitcoin because worst case, it goes to zero and they quit a vice. Best case, it goes bonkers and it's life-changing money. And if somebody had done that when I started saying it in 2017, they'd have hundreds of thousands of dollars right now, I guess, depending on how much they spent on vices. But, if they had just consistently put in a couple $100 a month, over the last 7 years, they'd have a lot of Bitcoin. But, people get interested in stuff when it's $100,000 instead of when it's $1,000. I saw a thing the other day from Mark Cuban, and typically I like a lot of Mark Cuban's stuff. I even bought a book about him, his one biography and stuff years ago, and read it. I thought it was a great book. But he said something the other day that I thought was just such a weird thing to say. Like all of these guys, these big time famous people like Kevin O'Leary and Mark Cuban, all these guys, they didn't have the best opinions of Bitcoin back in like 2017 when I got heavily involved in it, right? I remember Kevin O'Leary comparing it, crypto crap, I think is what he called it. Crypto crap, it's crypto crap. And then you had guys like Jamie Dimon, dogging on it, and you had guys calling it rat poison and all this stuff. But now you see these same characters, a lot of them like actually encouraging people to buy Bitcoin at $100,000. Like Mark Cuban said, like if you want to get rich and you're up for the risk, take 10% of your overall savings and put it in Bitcoin. But you have to plan on losing it all. But you might get rich. I'm thinking, why would you tell people to put 10% in when it's $100,000? Like that was the play to make when it was $1,000 or $3,000 or even $5,000. Back then, that play made sense because there was enough potential upside that if it went up 50x, it could become life-changing money. But telling somebody to do that when Bitcoin's $100,000, even if Bitcoin went to $1 million, which I think is unlikely, even if it went to $1 million, that's a 10x. 10xing 10% of your savings is probably not going to make you rich. It's essentially going to double your savings, right? Or double your net worth. If probably not double your net worth, because let's be honest, a lot of people's net worth is tied up in their homes and real estate and things like that. So it's not even liquid, right? It might double your liquid net worth, which for most people is not going to be life-changing. If you got $20,000 in savings and you put $2,000 in Bitcoin and it goes up to $20,000, that's not life-changing. If you have $100,000 in savings and you put 10 grand in Bitcoin and it goes up 10x, an extra 100 grand is probably not going to be life-changing anymore. Thanks, inflation. We won't blame that on any particular people. Wink, wink. But, like you look at where I live in a rural part of the country, I was making, between $80,000 and $85,000 when I stopped, W-2 and became self-employed. And that was, almost 15 years ago now. And I lived really good. We were a single income household. We always had money. We had a nice home, like all these things, right? I looked at an inflation calculator the other day and it said it was the equivalent of making like $130,000 a day between my income, my insurance that I had at the time that was free, and my salary. I think it was like $130,000 equivalent today. That's what people have to make today to live the exact same lifestyle that I was living then on roughly 80,000. And so even in this rural part of the country, now 6 figures, like 100,000 a year, basically middle class, right? So if you make an extra 100 grand, you're probably not changing your life. And if you already have, say, $1 million liquid, and you put 100,000 and you make an extra million, that's also not life-changing because you were already a millionaire to begin with. So I don't understand how a 10% investment in Bitcoin is going to be life-changing. Unless I'm just way off the market, it goes way, way up to millions and millions and millions of dollars for Bitcoin, which at this point, I guess anything is possible. If you asked me in 2017, I never would have saw it hitting 100,000 either. But I think we just got to, be realistic with our investments and be realistic with, our expectations. I think it's perfectly fine to have exposure to Bitcoin. I think like anything else, you should diversify and understand that it is basically a risk on asset. Okay. But also, I think the one thing that in the past I was really bad about, I don't think you have to think of Bitcoin like you think of altcoins. Like altcoins, they are rat poison. Okay. Altcoins are for trading. Bitcoin is for hodling if you're a long-term investor. Long-term investing in altcoins historically has resulted in 90 to 99% losses for people. Very few altcoins, with a handful of exceptions, but very few altcoins have panned out over the long term. Most of them today are down 90 to 99% from their all-time highs. You have a new altcoin comes out, a new pump and dump, a new scam, a new whatever. It's good for a while and then it fizzles out. The few exceptions that come to mind will be something like Ethereum, that when I got my first Ethereum, it was around like $80, $85, something like that. I think now it's over $2,000, $3,000. I haven't even looked at it in a few months, maybe a month. You have things like, what's another one that did well? B&B, right? When I was buying B&B back in the day for 50 cents and $1, whatever it was, I was spending it on my trading fees without realizing someday it would be worth $700, So B&B is one of those ones that's worked out. But then you have so many others that, just completely fell apart. And so I look at crypto today like this. You trade alts, you invest in Bitcoin. I never was a invest in Bitcoin guy because I believed it was so speculative, and I still believe it's speculative. But the thing I'll say about Bitcoin is it has become a lot more mainstream over the last, 7.5 years that I've been involved in it. And used to, when I talked about Bitcoin, people didn't even know what I was talking about. Like when I built my Bitcoin mining farm in 2017, I went to a family reunion and everybody was like, "What is that? What's that all about?" And a lot of people thought I was nuts. I mean, a lot of internet marketing friends and gurus gave me grief. And I remember being ridiculed for investing in Bitcoin. The joke's on them because now they're investing in Bitcoin at, 50 times what I invested in that, but that's okay. Like nowadays, if you say Bitcoin, even, young people, older people, even, a lot of, elderly people, 70, 80 years old, even they know what Bitcoin is. And so I do think there is an argument to be made that over long term, if we look back 20 years from now, it may be that Bitcoin is this speculative asset that eventually settles down and does eventually being the key word, become a hedge against inflation, a digital gold, if you will, which is what a lot of people said all along. It hasn't behaved like a hedge. It's behaved speculative. It goes up and it drops 80%. It goes up, it drops 80%. It goes up, it drops 80% over and over and over again. But I don't know. I don't plan on selling all of my Bitcoin, even at what I think is the top of the cycle. I probably will sell most of it and keep a very small amount, maybe even something like 0.1 Bitcoin or something, or even 0.05 Bitcoin I might keep, just on the off chance that, it does something really wild someday. I don't know. I haven't decided on the exact numbers yet, but so far it's been speculative. And the best way to play it up to this point has been to invest in it. If I'm talking about from an investment standpoint, not trading. Trading is you're in and out, but to invest in it, near bottoms of cycles, and then to try to sell near the tops of cycles. And even if you don't get the perfect top, to be patient, because Bitcoin over time has always crashed. Doesn't guarantee it will crash every time, but we have to go on statistics, right? Statistics say Bitcoin will crash again, and typically its crashes are anywhere from 75 to 95%. So if we believe, for example, that this is going to top in October, and we know that statistically speaking, markets during blow-off parabolic phases at least double, I think it is actually realistic to see Bitcoin hit $200,000 to $250,000. That's what I think. A potential $250,000 top. And if you think about an 80% drop from that, where does that put Bitcoin? It would put it around $50,000, meaning the next low could be somewhere around $50,000. Now, that's important to understand for a couple of reasons. One, because, the likelihood that we see $10,000 Bitcoin ever again is pretty low. But two, let's say that it's going up, and it's 150, 200,000 at some point, and you decide to take some profits, but then it keeps going up. A lot of people will panic and buy right back into that, and then it dumps and they're screwed. But you have to think about it like this. Jeremy Grantham, I think is his name. I saw him talk about bubbles years ago, and I loved the way he approached it. He said he had a very humble measurement of whether he won or lost, like his idea. If he was able to sell, even if the market went up more, as long as he was able to buy back later at a better rate, he considered that a win. And I think that's a really good strategy. If I sell Bitcoin, like I sold some Bitcoin, I sold about, I don't know the exact number, I think 10 or 20% of my Bitcoin at 100,000. Okay. And even when it dropped down to 90,000, I did not buy it back, which some people would be confused by because I expect it to go higher. I'm taking profits at specific levels. 100,000 was a big level, so I took some small profits. My expectation is that it will go up to 200 to 250,000, but that eventually I will be able to buy it back for 50,000 or somewhere lower than where I sold at. So let's say that I sell some at 100, I sell some at 150, I sell some at 200, I sell some at 250, and let's say that 250 is the top. My cost average will be somewhere in the higher end because I'll be selling bigger portions the higher it goes. So let's say my cost average after all that's said and done is 175. All I have to do is be able to buy it back cheaper than 175 to consider that a win. So let's say it goes to 250 and then drops to 75,000. Great. I take that money that I made from selling at 175 average and I put it back in at 75. So we're at 30 minutes. That's my thought, guys. I'm thinking fourth quarter 2025. I'm thinking $200,000 to $250,000 top. And I'm thinking the next bear cycle after that will probably drop it down to 50 to 75,000. And that should happen, in my opinion, by the end of 2026. So put this in writing because you guys seem to love this when I did this in 2019, especially since I was right? Called the 55 to $75,000 top, said it would happen before 2022. And of course, called the drop to 4,000 during COVID. I predicted that in August of 19. So this time we're going to do this. We're going to say fourth quarter 2025, 250K top. And we're going to say fourth quarter 2026, looking for a $50,000 to $75,000 low. So we'll look back at this in, 2 years, and I'll either get to pat myself in the back and be like, look, I did it again, or I'll make a complete fool of myself. Either way, I'm okay with it, right? I always get a kick out of the people who are very critical of content creators, but they never have the courage to put their own predictions out into the world. So I don't listen to anybody who lacks the courage to, stand up and say, this is my thoughts. It's easy to criticize other people. It's harder to have the courage to make your own videos. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Big thumbs up to everyone in my Facebook group who commented on my previous post. I appreciate the engagement. I realize that Facebook reach is just not what it used to be, and that's a huge problem. So eventually I will stop being lazy and I will probably create an email list. I resisted doing that the last, almost 8 years because that feels business-like, and I never wanted this to be a business. I wanted to focus on my own trading. This is just something I was doing for fun, but you can't reach people. It's hard to help people. So that's probably going to happen sometime in 2025. All right. If you haven't already, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching. Remember, I am not a financial advisor. I am just some guy sitting in a spare bedroom, which means you should always go out and do your own due diligence and seek out professional financial advice from a licensed financial advisor before making any type of investment in cryptocurrency, the stock market, precious metals, Forex, or any other tradable asset. Hope you all are having a great year. Take care.